The risk is death, the reward sacks of aid. Every grain of flour so precious in Gaza, where so many are starving. These Palestinians are returning from a distribution site of the Israeli and US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Close to 900 have been killed around them in just over 2 months. Now President Trump seems to be considering yet another new system of aid.
I send this message to US officials. End these things completely, stop the war entirely, and open the crossings so we can live like other countries. Let our children live.
Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff visited GHF sites in Gaza today, announcing the administration would begin work on a new plan to deliver food. Though the American ambassador to Israel, alongside him, praised the GHF's work so far as an incredible feat. In reality, the scheme designed to sideline the UN has been a deadly disaster, pushing Gaza into famine-like conditions. Images of skeletal children riling even traditional allies of Israel. With deaths from malnutrition soaring, some aid is now being dropped from the air for desperate crowds below to scramble over. Here you can see knives flashing amidst the crowd. Only the strongest have any chance. More aid trucks are being allowed in too, though most are stripped of their supplies before they reach their destination. And UN officials say they still face far too many obstacles from the Israeli authorities.
We still have only slightly more than a trickle of aid entering, and the routes that are given to us, the delays that we face, are still very much there. The routes remain congested, dangerous, and sometimes even impossible completely. So these kinds of things have to be addressed in order for any difference to actually be felt on the ground.
Hamas has lent into the crisis, today releasing a propaganda video of an Israeli hostage captioned, "They eat what we eat." We aren't showing their footage of an emaciated Eviatar David, seen here prior to October the 7th. Talks on a ceasefire have stalled as the bloodshed continues. Israeli bombs killing dozens every day. Here in Khan Yunis, they've gathered to mourn victims of one of the latest strikes. A plastic bag with body parts, a child nestled next to parents. War and hunger are battering this population.
What have our sons and daughters done wrong? What have the children done to deserve this famine?
International pressure on Israel is rising, but it's only America who has the power and influence to bring this bloody chapter to an end.
Well, earlier I spoke to David Anderson, a nurse currently working in Gaza with the humanitarian medical aid charity UK Med, and I began by asking him about the conditions on the ground in what the Global Authority on Hunger has described as a worst-case scenario of famine unfolding.
I think what we at UK Med, what we're beginning to see is an increasing number of children and adults, and particularly women who are pregnant, coming in the latter stages of malnutrition. It's clear that many of these people have had little or no appropriate nutrition for quite some time. They may have had some food, but the nutritional aspects of that are very deficient, and that is beginning to show quite remarkably in a lot of the cases that are coming in.
What happens when they come in? I mean, are they recoverable?
We've had some very sad cases recently where patients have come in the latter stages of severe malnutrition, which is ultimately unrecoverable. I mean, there are many people who are moving down that pathway now, sadly, which means that even if we had a large-scale volume of aid, food, water, appropriate nutrition coming in, and medicines, of course, then a lot of those people would be at a stage that, sadly, they aren't recoverable because their body has become damaged due to the malnutrition. You know, it leads to increased infections, increased diarrhea, respiratory diseases, and all that has a massive impact on their ability to recover.
There's been a lot of controversy. You know, as Israel has said, well, some of the examples that have been put out into the media were people who had prior conditions and disabilities. Presumably, they are precisely the people who are the most vulnerable to malnutrition.
Yeah, absolutely. People with pre-existing conditions are obviously going to be the people that are most vulnerable to malnutrition. People with disabilities who can't get to the places where aid may be most available. It also particularly impacts on children, pregnant women, and gives significant risks of profound wasting, stunting, increased mortality, and all that is pretty much irreversible, to be honest. It becomes very, very difficult to turn the tide on those issues. I say, even if we get a large volume of food and appropriate nutrition coming in.
And do you have the emergency, feeding and medication that you need to deal with these patients?
We have shortages of a lot of our supplies. They have been ordered. KOGA and others have given approval for those to come through, but it does take quite a significant period for those to get in. So an order that was placed some 4 or 5 months ago still has not reached our facilities, but it's taking that long for them to actually arrive into Gaza, with the backlogs and with the difficulties of getting them, unfortunately, brought in to give us support in exactly the places we need.
When you're treating a man-made famine, what does it make you feel or think about humanity?
So I spent 6 months in Gaza last year, and I was fortunate enough to come back in and work with my wonderful Palestinian colleagues again this year. And there's a stark difference between, within that 12 months. It's quite a depressing scene to come back into after, a fairly long period out, to see your colleagues, friends, your Palestinian colleagues who are now working really, really hard. But because of the lack of nutrition, they struggle, their families struggle. And it fundamentally gives you a little bit of disbelief in us, all of us as humans, to be able to do the right thing for all of our fellow humans at the right time. It is very difficult. It is a difficult place to work, and we would, as UK Med and all the rest of our NGOs in the country, would ask for the aid to be delivered in a more systematic manner.
David Anderson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now from Tel Aviv is Alan Pinkas, a former Israeli diplomat who served as an advisor to 2 former Israeli prime ministers. Thank you for joining us. We're at the end of a week here in which some of Israel's allies are now clearly turning on the government with their decisions to recognize a Palestinian state. And the IPC said famine is unfolding in Gaza now. Are any of these facts having an impact on Israeli politics or society?
Well, if you judge Krishnan by Mr. Netanyahu's reactions, he's completely impervious to this. He seems like he's untouched and unfazed by it. However, there's a critical mass that is being formed. It's one thing when Norway announces that it would recognize a Palestinian state, and quite no disrespect to Norway, but quite another thing when Britain, France, and Canada, all 3 announced within 1 week that they intend to recognize a Palestinian state. Even if it's a declarative and symbolic move, it carries weight. On top of which, there are 25 countries that 3 weeks ago signed a joint communique asking the war, demanding from Israel that the war end. The missing part is obviously the conspicuous absence of the US from these initiatives. It takes time for the Trump administration to get their act together. And Trump is, as we all know now, is both unpredictable and erratic, and with a very short attention span or patience. And so he could say one thing today and reverse himself tomorrow, or just ignore the whole thing. But if Trump puts his mind to it, and this is part of what his envoy, Steve Witkoff, is doing here, to the best of my understanding, if Trump does decide that it is time to end the war, if he does conclude, Krishnan, that he was misled, and I'm being very mellow and subdued here by calling it misled by Mr. Netanyahu, and promises and pledges have not been kept and fulfilled, then one phone call could end this war. Believe it or not, one phone call from Trump and this war will probably end, and that would be more than any other communique from 25 or 55 other countries.
And what about the attitude of Israeli society? Is that shifting at all? I mean, we've seen David Grossman, the eminent Israeli author, now saying he has to say this is genocide. Does that kind of thing carry weight in Israel?
Not as much as I'd like, to be honest with you. I mean, we can argue whether or not it is a genocide, whether it is legally, conceptually a genocide, but that's beside the point. There's hunger, there's starvation, there's famine, there's malnourishment, there's a humanitarian crisis, in a catastrophe in Gaza. For many, many months, Krishnan, Israelis willingly ignored what's going on in Gaza. It was a combination of their devastation, agony, and dejection of what had happened on October 7, 2023. And then it moved on to caring only about the release, and that's natural, only about the release of the hostages. But there came a point about 6 months ago that you would have expected, with the reports accumulating and the foreign media reporting and countries expressing their displeasure and condemnations of how Israel is prosecuting the war. There was a point about 6 months ago that you would have expected for more Israelis to stand up and say, enough, this is done in our name, and we're not happy with this. Oddly enough, Krishnan, the voices against this came from the military, who were asking, and still are asking, as a matter of fact, the government some hard questions. What are we doing there? Why is this war going on? What are the political objectives? And if there aren't any, we'd like to formally declare to you that all military objectives have been achieved. And so the Israeli public sort of was oblivious to, indifferent to, but about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when more and more stories such as the nurse that you just interviewed described came out, when front pages of The Independent, The Guardian in Britain, the New York Times, Washington Post in the US, Financial Times, Liberation, when they all came out with page one cover stories about what's going on in Gaza, something happened, and Israelis have become more attentive. I'm not saying they're out in the streets demonstrating, not yet at least, but the attention was somewhat diverted towards that from other issues.
Alan Pinkas, thank you very much indeed for joining us.